The old farmhouse stood on a lonely hill, a solitary sentinel against the relentless Kansas wind. For generations, it had belonged to the Miller family, its weathered wood and sagging porch a testament to time and the harsh elements. Sarah inherited it after her grandmother passed, a reluctant heir to a legacy she barely understood, let alone wanted. She'd spent her life in the bustling, predictable rhythm of a Chicago suburb, the vast, empty spaces of the Midwest feeling not just alien, but profoundly unsettling, like a void waiting to swallow you whole. Moving in was less a transition and more an invasion of dust and decay. Sunlight, thick with dancing motes, slanted through windows so grimy they seemed to filter the very light itself. The air hung heavy, smelling not just of mildew and disuse, but of something deeper, more fundamental, an earthy, damp odor that spoke of freshly turned soil and the slow, inevitable process of decay. Her grandmother, a woman Sarah remembered as being as unyielding and clean as polished stone, had apparently let the place go in her final years. This neglect felt like a betrayal, not just of the house, but of the stern, orderly woman who had lived there. The first week was a disorienting haze of cardboard boxes and tentative exploration. The house was a labyrinth, larger than its exterior suggested, with unexpected turns, narrow staircases leading to nowhere Sarah could discern, and a cellar door that seemed to breathe a particularly foul, musty air from below. But it was the fields that dominated everything. Stretching out from the foot of the hill in a vast, brown and gold patchwork, they weren't planted this year. Left fallow, the dry, brittle stalks of last season's corn rattled incessantly in the wind, a sound like skeletal fingers drumming on a forgotten coffin lid. The strangeness began subtly, almost imperceptibly. A floorboard would creak upstairs when Sarah was certain she was alone on the ground floor. A door she distinctly remembered closing and latching would be found standing open hours later, revealing only the dark, empty space beyond. The wind, a constant, mournful presence, sometimes seemed to carry sounds just at the edge of hearing, not words, but something akin to them, a low murmur that vanished the moment she tried to focus on it. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, attributed it to the natural noises of an old house settling, the tricks of the wind, and perhaps an overactive imagination fueled by the profound isolation. There were no neighbors within sight, only the endless, rustling fields. Then came the dreams. They were vivid, unsettling, and relentlessly repetitive. She would find herself lost in the cornfields at night, the stalks impossibly tall, looming over her like silent, watchful giants. The air in these dreams was thick and still, the constant wind conspicuously absent. And in that suffocating silence, she would hear it, a low, guttural humming that seemed to originate not from the air, but from the very earth beneath her feet, vibrating up through her bones. She'd wake up with a sharp gasp, heart hammering against her ribs, the silence of her bedroom feeling heavier, more oppressive than the silence in the dream. One evening, wrestling with a stubborn, leaky faucet in the kitchen, her hand brushed against the underside of the sink. She flinched, expecting a cobweb, but her fingers traced something hard and etched into the wood. Curious, she grabbed a flashlight. There, hidden from casual view, was a small, hand-drawn symbol. It was a circle with a jagged line drawn through it, resembling a broken sun or perhaps a distorted eye. It felt eerily familiar, like something she'd seen in books about ancient cultures or obscure folk magic, utterly out of place in her grandmother's practical, no-nonsense kitchen. The discovery opened a door she hadn't known was there. She started looking, really looking, at the house with new eyes. She found more of the symbols, etched into the wooden frame of the small, dusty attic window, almost invisible beneath layers of grime. Scratched onto a loose stone in the massive fieldstone fireplace hearth in the living room. Most disturbingly, carved deep into the gnarled, ancient base of the old oak tree by the back porch, the lines softened by years of bark growth but still discernible. Each discovery sent a fresh wave of unease prickling down her spine. The symbols felt deliberate, intentional. They felt protective, yes, but also possessive, like boundary markers or claims of ownership. The whispers in the wind grew clearer, more insistent. They were no longer just indistinct murmurs. They were sounds that hinted strongly at language, a low, continuous sibilance like dry leaves skittering across pavement, or perhaps something slithering just out of sight. She'd stand on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the evening chill, straining to decipher the sounds, the hair on her arms and neck standing on end. It felt like the land itself was trying to speak to her, or perhaps through the wind, using the dry corn stalks as its voice. Then, one night, the dreams escalated into outright nightmares. She was in the field again, the corn stalks now impossibly dense, forming an impenetrable wall around her. The humming was louder, a resonant thrum that seemed to shake the very ground. And then, the stalks began to sway, not with the familiar push and pull of the wind, but with a slow, deliberate, unnatural rhythm, like a living thing breathing. As they swayed, they parted, not randomly, but intentionally, revealing figures standing deep within the rows, hidden until that moment. They weren't human. Their forms were elongated and gaunt, made of shadow and the rustling, dry leaves of the cornstalks. They moved with a jerky, unnatural grace, their heads tilted as if listening intently to something only they could hear. And the humming, it was coming from them, a low, collective vibration that filled the dream space and seemed to emanate from their very being. Sarah woke up screaming, the sound raw and tearing in the silent house. She lay in bed, trembling uncontrollably, the image of the figures burned into her mind's eye. The dream wasn't just a dream, it felt like a revelation. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone and settled like a heavy stone in her gut, that they were real. And they were in the fields, watching. She tried desperately to rationalize it away. Stress from the move, the loneliness of her isolated existence, the oppressive atmosphere of the creepy old house, grief over her grandmother's death manifesting in strange ways. But the symbols, now appearing with disturbing frequency, the increasingly distinct whispers carried on the wind, the growing, suffocating sense of being watched from beyond the windows, it was too much to dismiss. She knew, deep down, that something ancient and malevolent was stirring in the land around her. Driven by a desperate need for answers, she started researching the history of the area. She spent hours at the small, dusty county library, poring over old town records, brittle newspaper clippings, and local folklore collections. She found fragmented, disturbing accounts of strange occurrences stretching back generations. Disappearances of settlers and farmers, livestock found mutilated in ways that defied explanation, unexplained crop failures that brought families to ruin. There were vague, unsettling mentions of field spirits, ancient entities tied to the land itself, demanding tribute or respect from those who dared to cultivate it. One particularly disturbing passage, found in a collection of local superstitions, described a ritual involving offerings made to the earth before planting season, a practice long abandoned by modern farmers as pagan nonsense. Her grandmother's journals, tucked away in a dusty, forgotten box in the attic, offered more chilling clues. They were mostly sparse, practical notes about farming cycles, weather patterns, and household chores. But interspersed within the mundane were cryptic, unsettling entries. Mentions of keeping them appeased, the hunger of the soil, and increasingly frantic warnings about letting the fields go untended. The last entry, scrawled in a shaky hand just weeks before her grandmother passed away, was a single, chilling sentence that echoed in Sarah's mind. They are restless. The time is near. It wasn't just neglect that had allowed the house to fall into disrepair, it was fear, a desperate attempt to avoid drawing attention, perhaps to break a cycle. The dreams intensified, becoming more frequent and more terrifying. The figures in the field were closer now, their forms clearer, more defined. Their skin was like dried, cracked earth, their eyes like polished stones reflecting the cold light of the moon. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, their long, skeletal hands reaching out, not towards Sarah specifically, but towards the house, towards the boundary between their world and hers. The whispers were no longer confined to the wind. They were everywhere, in the walls, in the floorboards, in the very air she breathed. They were insidious, a constant, low murmur that seemed to seep into her mind. They were coaxing, promising, demanding. Join us, become one with the soil, feed the earth, the cycle must continue. Sarah stopped sleeping almost entirely. The nights were the worst. She'd spend them sitting by the living room window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the dark, expansive emptiness of the fields. The cornstalks seemed to lean towards the house, their dry rustling sounding less like wind and more like 1,000 tiny claws scraping incessantly against the glass, testing its strength. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every distant sound seemed to be the approach of something unnatural. One afternoon, venturing out onto the front porch for a breath of air that didn't smell of damp earth and decay, she found a fresh symbol etched into the wooden railing. It was the broken sun again, but this time, it felt different. Less like a protective ward, more like a brand, a mark of ownership, a claim being staked. It was closer to the house than any of the others she had found. Panic, cold and sharp, finally began to set in. She knew, with absolute clarity, that she had to leave. Now, pack a bag, grab her keys, get in her car, and drive. Drive until the fields were gone, until the air didn't hum with unseen energy, until she was in a city, any city, where the silence wasn't filled with unseen voices and the land didn't feel like a living, hungry entity. But as she stood by the front door, keys clutched in her trembling hand, a profound, bone-deep weariness washed over her. The air in the house felt impossibly heavy, thick with the cloying scent of damp earth and something else she couldn't name, something ancient and potent. The whispers were a chorus now, surrounding her, a symphony of sibilant voices urging her to stay, to surrender. The earth calls you. The fields await. You belong here. She looked out at the fields one last time. The sun was setting, bleeding orange and purple across the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows that stretched like grasping fingers towards the house. The stalks seemed to ripple and shift, not with the natural movement of the wind, but with an internal, deliberate motion. She could almost see the figures moving within them, their forms indistinct in the failing light but undeniably present, waiting. A strange, unsettling sense of calm settled over her, washing away the panic. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but it was overlaid with something else. A sense of inevitability, of belonging, of a destiny she couldn't escape. Her grandmother had known. This house, this land, it wasn't just property, it was a part of something ancient, something hungry, something that demanded to be fed. She dropped the keys. They clattered on the wooden floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. She turned away from the door that led to escape and walked, slowly, deliberately, towards the back door, the whispers growing louder, more insistent, pulling her forward. She stepped out onto the back porch, the cool evening air washing over her, carrying the overpowering scent of damp earth, rich and fertile and demanding. She walked down the 3 wooden steps and onto the dry ground, moving towards the edge of the field, the dry stalks brushing against her legs like eager hands. As she walked deeper into the rows, the humming started, low and resonant, vibrating not just in her chest, but throughout her entire being. The stalks closed in around her, forming a dense, rustling wall, the last light of the setting sun disappearing behind the leafy barrier. She could hear the rustling getting closer, the sound of movement all around her, surrounding her. She wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had been replaced by a profound sense of peace, of returning home. There was only the irresistible pull of the earth, the ancient, undeniable call of the fields. She stretched out her hands, her fingers brushing against the dry, rough stalks, feeling the life that pulsed beneath their surface. The figures emerged from the deepening gloom, their earthy skin and eyes like polished stones catching the last, fading light. They surrounded her, their gaunt forms swaying in eerie unison with the pervasive humming. They reached out, their hands like gnarled roots, and touched her. The touch was cold, but not unpleasant. It felt like being embraced by the earth itself, welcomed into its ancient, dark heart. The whispers intensified, no longer just sounds, but thoughts, feelings, memories flooding into her mind. The deep history of the land, the insatiable hunger of the soil, the countless lives that had returned to feed it, to become a part of the cycle. She closed her eyes, the humming filling her ears, drowning out all other sound, all other thought. She felt a merging, a dissolving, her body becoming one with the earth, her consciousness spreading out into the soil, into the vast, intricate network of roots beneath the surface, into the dry stalks of the corn, into the endless, whispering fields. The farmhouse stood silent on the lonely hill, its windows dark, a forgotten silhouette against the twilight sky. The fields below swayed gently, the dry stalks rustling in the breeze, a sound that was both mournful and expectant. And if you listened closely, just at the edge of hearing, you could still hear the whispers, a low, sibilant murmur carried on the wind, promising, demanding, waiting for the next harvest, waiting for the next one to return to the soil. The fields were never truly fallow, they were simply waiting to be fed.